Welcome to BFR Radio, a podcast dedicated to all things BFR. This podcast is proudly sponsored by sportsrehab.com.au, where if you want to buy your own BFR cuffs, or you want more information about the type of training, or you just want more information, this is your one place to go. And I'm your host, Chris Gavilio. Welcome back to BFR Radio. And I'm straight into how you do BFR, and I've got Matt Ham, strength and conditioning coach. Welcome aboard.
Thanks, mate. Good to be here.
So, firstly, a potential language warning here. Matt may drop a few bombs occasionally, and look, it's all in good jest, and I think everyone's going to really enjoy this convo. And before we get into it, why I'm excited about getting Matt on is that I actually went to school with him a long time ago now.
Long time ago.
And I actually remember you being probably about a third of the size that you were.
I was only a pup, mate, when I saw you. You were the big boys. You were leaving school as I was starting. So,
yeah.
My brother's age. Yeah, I remember you guys being absolute tanks, and I was just this skinny little fella, and then I actually got a bit bigger around that grade 11, 12. I was the late bloomer. So,
and then fast forward, I don't know, like 20 odd years, being overseas, came back. We went to an SSC conference, and then there's this Matt Ham, this unit. Like, how tall are you?
6'4", 6'4", 110 kilos.
Yeah. So, and like, he's solid. He's got some muscles on him. This boy has.
Oh, please.
And I just went Matt Ham, and then I just went, no, like that's not the Matt Ham I went to school with. And pretty cool transformation, like in terms of, from the Burdekin, there's 3 S&C coaches, yourself, myself, and Tony Lewis, who I had on the podcast a couple ago. So, and I'd actually we follow each other as all good professionals do. And, I know some of the work you do at Hammer Athletic with your German volume training program you add in BFR. So it's practical BFR in particular. And I've always thought it'd be really nice to get you on from that angle, but we're skipping a little bit ahead. So a bit about yourself. You had a really cool sporting journey, and tell a little bit about your sporting journey and how that led into the profession that you currently had.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. So a long time ago when I used to play soccer, up here up north, and I was at the representative team for a long time. And at the same time, I was doing my bachelor degree up here at James Cook University, and I was at the end of the NSL, and in between that A-League, before the A-League started, they came up for a bit of a tour to build membership, and I played for the local team up here in Townsville against Brisbane Roar at the time, and I had a bit of a good game. Obviously, I'm a goalkeeper, so I was quite busy coming up against a professional team, and I got noticed and gave up everything, finished my degree, and went down south, and from there, after a lot of hard work, got a contract, a professional contract, and I got injured and in and out of the side with some major injuries. So I've had 3 shoulder reconstructions and 1 knee reconstruction, so I've had some time out. But I fought back in a few times, and I finally got to a point where I was probably. It was 30 or so games sitting on the bench in the A-League, and then I played about, I think it's 11 games in the A-League. So under, Frank Farina, Andrew Postecoglou and all those guys. And I had stints up here at the North Queensland Fury. Then I got signed at the North Queensland Fury in my last year that I got to play. I did my knee, and that was the end for me. I just decided at 27, I was a goalkeeper. There's only 22 positions in the country, and that when now North Queensland Fury folded, there was only 20 positions, and all the contracts were gone, and I wasn't going through the lower leagues to do it again. I just didn't have the heart anymore. So I decided to do what's the next best thing for me. And I spoke to a good friend who was our SSC coach at the time, Al McCall. He's over in Arsenal and Barcelona, all that now these days. And he said, why don't you get into, you've done your sports science degree. Why don't you go and do your masters or get stuck into S&C? And he said, it's the next best thing to playing. So, and I've had that in my mind ever since. So, it was a passion of mine. I've obviously always had that health science in me. Then I went and did the Masters over in ECU back in 2011, 11, I think. And I finished that in 2 years, and it's unbelievable. Some of the kings of the industry who were my lecturers, and, the Greg Haffs, the Dan Bakers, the Jeremy Shepherds, and all those guys I was really lucky, walked into an unbelievable faculty, and I've ever since then I've gone from starting up my own gym after I finished that and used some of those things that we implemented. Like we're going to talk to you about that. Like I learned about occlusion. It was called occlusion more back then, and that's what maybe I'll put these sorts of things that I learned back in those early days and put them into a gym, and hadn't been done a lot before. And then from there, I had stints with the Brisbane Roar again as an S&C coach, multiple NPL teams, a couple of boxers, couple of swimmers. We've had a fair share of our athletes in and outs, and then from there, I was lucky enough to get to, which just seems a bit an odd job, is I got to go to Guam, the Guam international soccer team, which was one of my friends from the Brisbane Roar has got the head coaching role, and he brought me on as S&C coach, which, unbelievable experience. Weird to say that I was Guam strength and conditioning coach, but, they were in the Asian League, so the Asian Cup. So, we did all the qualifiers the same as Socceroos, and our group, we had China, Mongolia, Bhutan. We had some some big players in the team, and we got to go to some wild old places, and it was a real experience. And I was there with them for 3 years. And the good thing about Guam, it's a lot of MLS players from the States, so I had to deal with a lot of MLS athletes, and so and I traveled all over the world. So and I got exposed to competition play, but probably what you're going through now with the bubble, but really intense short FIFA windows where you had to get boys up and ready to play after. And a lot of our guys traveled huge things, and we used BFR in those camps as well, which I can touch on later. But then I came back, and now since then my business has been running for over 7 years, and we're on our moved up to Townsville. We're about to thinking about starting another one up here. We've got some interest, and also I've just been recently given the Townsville Blackhawks gig up here for the QRL team. So that's a bit about what I've been through and how I got to where I am. So not the greatest playing career, but it led me to where I am today. So don't regret anything. So.
Yeah, and I think they all have. That's part of the journey, and sometimes that's what makes us good coaches. I did track and field to a reasonable level, but nothing. No Olympics, nothing to put in the newspaper about. But definitely the lessons I've learned and the coaches that I've been mentored by have really shaped me. Like the course you did at ECU by the all the big names in S&C that I think we all highly respect. Before we get into BFR, because like Guam Football Club, starting your own business, you've just finished your degree. What made you think about going down that route of starting a business first?
Well, at the time, as a pro soccer player, like in the A-League, we weren't earning massive money, and I was obviously on the lower end of the salary scale. So, and I always, my dad always said, you can play, he was always a massive supporter, but he always never stuff up your education. So he was pushing me to always get my degree. So when I got my degree and I went down to play soccer, he always said, make sure that you're still doing something just in case it doesn't work, because it's obviously a high-risk job, trying to be a professional athlete. And I always, I got into a commercial gym. It was a little gym at the time, then built into a commercial gym. And I was working as a personal trainer, as most of our strength, exercise scientists were doing for, there was not many jobs back in the day in 2004, 2000 to 2010, to be fair. A lot of those jobs were the guys who were lecturers later on. So they already had those jobs. So, and I was doing that. I was personal training, doing the local clubs, taking my own local soccer teams and being involved, but I was also playing professionally at the time. The good thing about being a PT is you could manipulate your hours. When I got to my master's and I finished the thing, my wife had just done her MBA as well. She was like, I had a little subsider working for me, so because I was very, very busy at the gym, and I was implementing things like I was doing overreaching at the end of a year, which is I'd get clients in 2 times a day, train them up for 10 days or 7 days, things that no one's ever done before, and then what better time to have a week off of underreaching through Christmas. And people felt guilt-free through Christmas because they trained so hard. It was this really awful thing. And I explained the science to them, and we do athletic development programs, which is like I do everything that 8-week challenges would do, but I changed the name, but I do it in a periodized way. And I think people really was refreshing in a commercial aspect where it was just like flog you and leave you. And by having that degree really opened my eyes. It's like, there's a real market here for a bit of service and a bit of forethought. And my wife goes, why don't we just do our own? We're paying huge rent anyway, so we might as well just pop our nose. So we found our own place, and then I had the freedom to do what I wanted and set up the gym how we wanted. And, back then there was no F45s or fit stops and things like that. So when we did our group strength sort of stuff, which is very, very big now, like CrossFit's very big, and all those numerous sorts of people and with one coach, we were doing that. We were only with like 5 or 6 to 1. So with that, we periodized a program, but we had 4 or 5 people, so we leveraged the hours. And then what we could do then is like I always do like a month of work, and then we do a week of BFR or occlusion at the time. And again, what Jim was doing occlusion in the general public, no one. And I use that as a deload. It was less than the central nervous system, even though it flogged the muscular system, but that recovers quicker. And then by the following week, bam, we were back into a new phase. And that's how, and I've literally been doing that for 7 years. And the way we were doing BFR back in the day was just, which you'll hear about probably more, was the old powerlifting wraps. I was wrapping legs, and all because of stuff that I'd learned from that degree. So and that's what started it. Why I started the gym was just that I could then, without uninhibited, not worrying about the membership. I had control of the membership. I had control of the way the business was run, and which allowed me to do things that probably aren't the greatest at making money because not everyone understood them. But over time, I educated our hammer guys, and to this day, my staff are there unbelievable. They, most of our hammer guys are the most educated staff, and educated clients, and I really enjoy that because we have a great retention rate. We don't have the huge amount of people that pop in, but we have a really good retention rate, and that's because of these things that I learned, from that degree all that long ago, and obviously doing all those ASCA conferences and level 2s and level 1s and level 3s now, and I've done all that, and I've come out and learned a lot from a lot of people like yourself, and coming away and we implement that. I try and implement that to the general public where it's all meant for the athletes, but there's nothing wrong with dumbing it down and giving it to the guys, because at the end of the day, most athletes look good. So the general public want to look good, and why not make them stronger? So at least they stay in the gym longer, which means makes us more money. So that was always my consistency is key, and being strong and healthy and forward thought. And that's what started the business.
Yeah, great journey. And I think also
probably rambled then. Sorry, mate. Yeah.
No, it's good. For me, really insightful. And, many people that I talk to we call it Gen Pop as opposed to versus elite athletes.
Yeah.
For me, they want to know what the elite athletes are doing.
Exactly.
And I always find if we can somehow find a way of tailoring a training program that says, well, this is what I'm doing with these elite athletes, but I'm being smart in how I'm coaching you. Most of the time, they actually probably accelerate their performance anyway, as opposed to doing 3 sets of 12.
Absolutely. They jump on it, mate.
And they really enjoy it because it's refreshing as opposed to being flogged or doing the same supersets or whatever that you can just rip off the internet.
Exactly. Yep.
Now, before we get into BFR, selfishly, the Guam Football Association, that just really intrigues me, because when you go into a national team, so, we're talking about bubbles. So if anyone wants to know what this bubble is, so I'm working with the State of Origin team, the Queensland team, and I'm, stuck in a hotel for 3.5 weeks. We fly in and out on the same day to Adelaide, Sydney, and Brisbane. And then at the end of the 3.5 weeks, I'll probably be at home for another week quarantine. So it's really intense. We're bringing, similar to yourself, bringing players from all different clubs. They've got their different training methodology that works well for them. So you have to learn that quite quickly. What are some of the challenges and some of the learnings from that experience? Because this is unique, where you've got superstars in the soccer world or the football world coming into one place. You have to gel as a coach with them. You have to bring a level of uniformity across the program, and also performance at the end of the day is key. Can you elaborate there at all?
Absolutely. So, if anyone's been in soccer, it's a different beast of the rugby league boys that I'm dealing with now, where physical prowess is such a major part of the game, where soccer, and always has this ethos of strength training is a negative, and it's just starting to turn. And still to this day, you get many, many coaches who will overdo the skills component. Like I've always said to my coaches, if you can't dribble at 21 years old, shouldn't be here. You know what I mean? So if they're worried about that stuff, it's time to make them better athletes so they can, as long as they're getting touches of the ball. And it's a real different beast. And it's funny, when I was at the Royal, we did have, some of those superstars who, some ex-Socceroos and all that, and they were very nervous. They've come from overseas sort of setups where they hardly touched the gym equipment and all that sort of stuff. So to try and get buy-in is such a harder thing to do than, say, sports that don't. So then when my coach went to Guam, my friend of mine, Carl Dodd, he became the head coach around. He's also done sports science, so he was very well aware, and he was the head of high performance at the Raw. And then I was his 2IC. And then when he actually took the coach's role, then he put me as head of high performance there, because he knew I knew my stuff, but he was the good thing that I had was he was a firm believer in, athlete development. So he wasn't a guy who said, okay, he understood, he wasn't a coach who had just touched on GPS or strength training or whatever. He said, can you get them prepared? And the good thing about Guam was there's not as many superstars, you know what I mean? So we did have our fair share. We had 3 or 4 MLS players who were earning, a good quid and decent teams. Houston Dynamo, Seattle. We had one called LA Galaxy, which we were lucky enough to go and see. And, so they're decent teams that are playing with Beckham and that, but quite obviously at the end of their career. But then we had a lot of college athletes, which is massive in the States, and the Division 3 and Division 1 sort of schools. And they had these ridiculous programming where in the States, it's so much volume. It's like 3 times a day. It's almost like a job these poor kids get through. Then they have this time where they aren't touched for like 9 weeks and they can't be touched due to NCAA rules. And then when you get them back on these rules, and it's really hard. And then, so I would set these programs with parameters out with other coaches and say, can we follow this? And they'd come back with, they're doing sets of, 15 and 10 reps. And I'm thinking, what are you doing that for? You've just done 40 Ks for the week, like they played 3 games on AstroTurf. You're like, crazy. So then I was with the setup for 2 years, and we did get some leeway and get some headway with some of these coaches, and they were starting to drop their rep around, and then when we had them in, it was always like we didn't have the huge expense accounts and we didn't have all that stuff. So I'd either take some of my stuff from the gym, I'd take the wraps and I'd take some push bands. And when we did our weight sessions, as always with the forethought, like we're not going to have much time or not have much things. And then we've also dealing with soccer players who aren't as strong as, say, some of these other physical demanding sports that we deal with. So it was a definite huge experience. And we're also coming up against guys like China that when we played them, was it 75,000 people in the stadium. Marcello Lippi was their coach on $14 million a year. We're trying to do everything on a budget of, my toll money. So when we went in, I would go into these setups and you have to, first of all, you and your physio are trying to break down what we're dealing with, what kind of people, some of these guys had some real issues and trying to do what we can to get them on the field and try and avoid detraining because some of them have been doing quite well. So all these sorts of things are in play. And it was a real challenge, and it's pretty much what you're going through now at the bubble. We had an intense time. Like we didn't, in Mongolia, you're literally there for 10 days. Well, we were there for 10 days for this mini tournament, and Ulaanbaatar wasn't the greatest of tourism spots, and you didn't leave too far, and you stuck with this in this hotel that wasn't so great, and the pitches were awful, and training was and it just becomes such a regimented thing. Poor food, lack of equipment, blah, blah, blah. But, you get through and it really makes you really become a better coach. I've always said the coaches who deal with shittier teams and shittier budgets are the better coaches because they're so much more resourceful. I don't want to hear about the guys playing at Manchester United or that sort of stuff because they've had everything given to them. It's the guys who haven't had the stuff that I think it's made me a better coach 100%. And the things I did that were wrong, the things I did that were right, and I've learned from that. And hopefully I transpire that into the Black Hawks. So I think that was an invaluable experience. Just trying to get these guys ready in these ridiculous and extreme conditions, like compared to we're trying to control diet and we'd walk in, like we went and check the kitchen. You're like, oh geez, they're not boiling the water, or, we can't have them, sick and 3 days. Like it's all these sorts of things you wouldn't think of. You've got to be really on it because it's in Asia, it's a different beast. So, I remember playing against Mongolia in Mongolia. They would throw you off the field because they were down 1-0. But when they were time wasting, they'd start it from the 4th minute. It was just really two-way rules for everyone. It was real eye-opener. And, playing in Bhutan we played in, 2,000 meters, so higher than Denver. We're in the Himalayas. So you fly past Mount Everest and you fly in, we're on top of the world, and we're playing. Trying to get the boys ready for that was a real ordeal. We didn't have the chance to live high, train low, or any of that altitude stuff that we all been taught at uni. Flew in. We had 7 days to prepare for a game, and a couple of trainings, and bizarre. And it was these sorts of sessions that trying to get them top ups and gym sessions. Can we not make them not too sore? And at the same time, they're running on synthetic because there's no grass up there. And then from there, we went to China, Guangzhou. 40 degrees, so in tropical weather, it's like Townsville. It's just from one to the other, and because it's such a FIFA window as a drive in, in Asia they try and do 3 or 4 games, and it was full on. It was a good experience. So.
and obviously lots of learning there as well. And it kind of almost sounds like never assume is probably a good way of.
Yeah, just have to be so fluid. Like, no, what a planning I had. The things I gave them, the boys, who were pretty diligent, to be fair. They really were a good group, and they really stuck it to because they went further than they've ever been before. Like, us to qualify for the group stage just never happened. We're ranked 196 in the world,
Yeah, right.
and we made the qualification round. We finished second in that one. We actually would have been up against, could have played like your Koreas, your Japans, your Chinas, Australia. It would have been really bizarre that a couple of Australian boys who had to travel away to be involved in an international setup. But it was exactly like the Socceroos would have been, in that same sort of feeling, but just without the budget. So it was a challenge of sometimes where I hated it. I won't lie to you, being away from your family, as you might know, family in a weird place with no internet, or trying to, you just get sick of being with a bunch of lads for too long, as always as well. And even though as good as they are, but it was definitely challenges. But geez, I look back now and go, take that experience away and go, not many people, everyone kind of chuckles when you say things like that, like I was with Guam, but I probably what I learned from those little stints is such an invaluable experience.
Oh, definitely. And even my experiences here at the camp, I'm
Yeah.
still doing stuff and learning
How random.
from
Yeah,
my mistakes, and doing
absolutely.
stuff on the fly. And anyway, so for those people who have tuned in to listen about how Matt does BFR, we're finally going to get into that now. And there's obviously a couple of examples I think are going to come out of here. The first one that I'd love you to touch on, you started to talk about how you use it effectively as a deload, but you used it within your German volume training. And I guess what I'd like you to explain is just how globally you used it and the clients who used it. What did they feel when they used it for the first time? Because, people have
Yeah.
different reactions. And I guess some of the results that you may have had from that.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, at Hammer, I was a big anti 8-week challenger. So, my best way to build the year, well, I used to call it the German volume training. So it was like probably the closest thing we get to an 8-week challenge. I'd give them diet advice, nutrition advice, and then I'd put them on this, the German volume. And when I first started business, it was, 10v10, and I went through the old school 1984 method or 76 method by Fritz, whatever his name was. And we did the 3 body groups, 10x10, blah, 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 3 times a week, and, we had a massive, obviously, anyone who does that much volume and eats okay is having a massive effect on their fat loss. And it was a really, really successful program. And with the years, it got a bit of a following, and everyone, as much as they hated it and hard, every year we just kept modifying it and changing it and changing it and changing it. So by the 5th and 6th year, I started to think, we're running out of ideas here. So we started off with like a modified, well, it's not even probably German volume anymore. We'll just end up becoming like this big, huge volume program. But we kept German in front of it because we had that following. And we started off with a 10v10 in the first week, and then we went to 8v8, 6v6, 5v5. And then in the 5th week, we implemented occlusion or BFR at the time. And so obviously as we got more tired and everything starting to hit on its wit's end, basically overreaching for that long. Again, it was only 3 sessions a week, and I minimized their cardio and all those sorts of things that we did that I told them to do, and they adhered to it. But by the end, then, even though German volumes, usually at 50 or 60% anyway, but with ours, we went 50% with the 10v10, 60% with the 8v8, 70% with the 6v6, and then close to 80% of their RMs for the 5v5, right? Which is, so we were going up with our percentage RM, which means there's more and more stress on the central nervous system, even though the muscular system's still getting flogged, but in saying the muscular system's actually getting a bit of a rest, as our obviously more input from the strength aspect. So when it got to that 5th week, we were like, okay, we'll just completely come from that 80% straight down to 30% of the percentage RM, and we wrapped our clients up into our power wraps that I bought. So usually the power wraps for the knees, I put them around their quads, up high on the quad, and the power wraps for the wrists, I put that around their arms and wrapped them tight. We obviously asked the clients and told them, obviously we've done it before, and we pushed the clients, said, listen, unless you've got a heart problem, this is quite safe. And even then, it's not really much evidence to say there is an issue, but we put them through this awful week then. So hopefully it was the final week of the thing before they got tested again. And so we would do the same protocol for the legs. I think we did a 30 rep, 15 rep, 15 rep, 15 rep, which was just off a study that I saw. I can't even remember why. It was just what the protocol that they used, and I thought, why not? We'll use that. We did that also with Romanian deadlifts, and then we moved into like we did do lunges in the first year of this, and it was crazy that like the legs were screaming, stabbing them, and it was hilarious. But we gave them a break between the squat. We went squats, Romanians, and we gave them a mini break because we ran out of wraps because we did it in phases. So then the next group got the new wraps and we wrapped them up, and it was a bit sweaty, but put a towel on, a bit yucky. Not COVID safe these days, but and then we gave them back to them and went through it again, and they did the lunges in it, and then we did the upper body later in the week. And it was just like they hated the experience. Like, they thought it was awful, but they finished it. It was just this amazing feeling that, well, what the hell's going on? They were pumped up. Their arms were massive. Their legs felt really full. And I think because it was the last of a culmination of a massive program, we had a really, really, really good response. And to be fair, just before that, most of my clients were familiar with it because we did use it as a deload between programs anyway. So not to that extent because that was actually part of the program, but normally we use it for a deload for 1 week after we did testing. So we might do strength testing or our skin files, which took up a bit of time. And then so their Thursday, Friday session would be occlusional BFR. So they'd be absolutely shattered again, but at a really low percentage RM. And they'd come back the next week, not detrained, feeling fresh. And we'd start again and we'd start our next phase of training. And the way, like I said, the way I had hammer, we do volume and then we do strength and then we do strength power. Then we flip back to volume and we just flow that through. And that was our volume phases, our GVT, which set us up for the year. Our guys came back from Christmas feeling a bit overweight or for shit house. They come back a bit leaner. What a better thing to do than volume. And then we put BFR in that last one, which was a bit crazy. Then the following year, we actually had then the push bands and we did velocity loss, BFR, 10v10. So we were just adding more and more things to it. So it become this beast on its own. I don't even know what to call it now. It wasn't really German volume, more like hammer volume. But yeah. So it ended up becoming quite a feature in all of it, most of our training then. But it was, we used in that last sort of week just to finish them off, if you want. But it was because it's safe. We've gone from squats. So we would do goblet squats and Romanians and limited deflection. So even though they're tired and a bit ragged by that week, we gave things where there wasn't too risk averse. So, and obviously having high reps and low rep weight, it's even safer again. So it was just one of those things that was perfectly snug at the end of that program. We had such a good result with it. So they loved it, hated it. Like they literally, some of them were like getting stabbed, getting that real lactic response and that acidosis. And, they fucking hated it. Also, there it is. They fucking hated it.
There it is. Finally.
Yeah,
we're finally 30 minutes in and it's the first one gone.
Yeah, no, it's just the longest I've done without swearing. So, but no, it was a really good thing, and it was really successful. It was good, and we even from there we obviously use it for injured young ones that we got coming through, and we'll become a real feature because those power reps, there was nothing like your cuffs or any of that out there back in the day, and I was like wishing something was easier to use than wrapping them up. But I had to buy a fair few of those old powerlifting wraps. We went through a few, so yeah. But it was povo, but it did the job. So how measurable was it? I don't know. It was not exactly controlled study, but anecdotally, surely there was something happened through the research that had been done at that time, and I'm sure there would have been some great adaptations from it, anyways. But it was really good. It was really good, and what that did when I come into professional athletes, I know how to use it. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of stuff out there regarding practical BFR where they've used straps and everyone's got their different methodology. 7 out of 10 is typically RPE that you say, well, how tight is it?
Yeah, that's what I'd say. And 10, 7, they're like, yep, done. All right, that was my, yeah.
And it sounds like, with your level of education that you've educated your clients or your athletes very well. So they would know if they're testing, they'd be knowing what a 10 out of 10, a 7 out of 10 is, and a 1 out of 10 is. And as I said, as long as you have your checks in place, there's other things called capillary refill time where there's points on the palm or on the VMO, press that. And Skin color is another big one, and obviously just looking at the response of your clients as well. Like, are you fatiguing over the sets and so forth? And I think it's a smart way of deloading. I actually, interestingly, do that with a couple of athletes I work with. Is we get to a deload week, I still need them to stay in touch with the exercise. So like spinal loading for me is a consideration the whole time. So if I have a week off spinal loading, how does that affect my next week? So I can continue doing step ups, continue to load on the spine, but just deload it and use the cuffs as a nice recovery piece. I think as you really hit on it is as much as it's tough at the time, they take it, then they go, oh, it's just the hardest thing ever. They take it off, and pretty much the next day they go, oh, it was a solid session, but I feel fine. And I think that's amazing.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so appealing. It's so appealing. It just, we all know it takes 7 days to detrain, and you've done a good batch of work, you know what I mean? And how do we keep them fresh? How do we don't want to go into that following week and carry that accumulative fatigue and maybe start doing shit results, that sort of stuff just gives us that fresh outlook. Boom, we come into the next week. We haven't deloaded. We haven't detrained, but we've deloaded. And as coaches, isn't that the hardest thing to do is to try and get maximum performance with least amount of work, and these sorts of things, these sorts of tools is like such an essential part of what we do. And I think, how clever, something so simple, and we've had such great results with it. So, nail on the head.
I think from a periodization viewpoint as well, for me and probably for yourself, like every week and every session has a purpose to it. So even your deload week has a purpose. You don't want them to detrain. You want them to come back in good shape. So how do you give purpose to their session that they're doing and make them, especially when they're paying money to come and train, how do you make them feel like they're getting a good quality session as opposed to just doing something light or having a stretch where they say, oh, I could be doing this at home?
Yeah, that's right. And that you nailed that, and that was absolutely perfect because firstly, they're paying you almost $1 a minute, or if not more than $1 a minute. So my biggest thing was when we deload, first part of the week we will do an RM test. And I was always a big believer that RM testing is a deload, right? You're reducing your reps, you smack your central nervous system, but then by the time we come back, you've had 7 days before. So we're not really losing our strength adaptation. But then later in the week, you've got to see him again. I'm not going to smack him again because then that defeats the purpose. And I didn't want us to cancel them. So, listen, just have one session this week because my fucking rent's the same, you know what I mean, each week. So I've got to pay the bills. Yeah. So you've also got to have the element of business aspect. You go, fuck, we've got to get some, keep these guys coming, and we've got to make them feel like, this is why I come to Hammer, or this is why I come to the gym, is got to feel like I've done something. But at the same time, morally as a coach, I can't sit there and go, oh, you know what? No, we're just going to flog you again because that defeats the whole purpose of why I set my business up. So how did we do it? We did it with BFR, and we got a massive session. They're so fucked after it, but at the same time, it doesn't affect their forward thinking. So forward performance. So it was awesome. And it was something. And you know what? It was also a point of difference that no one had at the time. No one was doing that around me. No one was doing it. No one even heard of it. So, if I pat myself on the back, I like to think that, I was one of the first ones of those guys who were even thinking of this stuff at the time, in commercial aspect anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't heard anything like that, systematically using it, in a really smart and clever way. You said you squatted, remaining deadlift, lunged.
Curls, tricep extensions, classic. We had to get them in, and we did some floor press. Yep. So partials.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so we always did, like I said, I didn't want to go through huge, again, because it was a deload, can we do partials that would still get the same effect so we're not ripping out the whole system again? I always thought partials is, not as fatiguing as it can be as big groups. But our squats was goblet squats. We didn't do, like you said, I was a massive believer of not having huge spinal loading, especially after such a load in 5 weeks through GBT. So I was just so worried about that, back squats and front squats. So we did goblets, which, right down, we did 30% their RMs, and they fucking, doesn't matter who you are, the kind of rep ranges I threw out, then were still fucking hard. And then, even the next year after that, I made Prowler instead of the lunges with it, and that was awful as well. So, the whole reverse sled for the VMOs, and, we had definitely a lot of women not very happy with me. And, we never nailed it properly. So sometimes it was too tight. They're like, I can't feel my legs. So we change it. And, those sorts of things, we didn't nail the pressure all the time. Sometimes I think people hid and say, yeah, it's fine, but you knew it probably wasn't tight enough. And, you have those sorts of things. It wasn't like we were nailing it 7 out of 10, getting perfect every time, but most of them was pretty good. I'd say 80 to 90% loved it.
So if this makes you feel any bit better about the whole pressure thing, if you would go onto a arterial occlusion 50 to 80%,
yeah,
it's a range, depending on the cup width,
right.
depending on sensation of the athlete or the client. And I'll calculate some pressures on people and I'll go, that's too tight. And I'll have to adjust it. And actually in camp, I've been getting a few of the players to use it for pain.
Yeah,
They have a lot of knee and shoulder issues. So doing really basic movements. And with the size of these guys, the pressure I'm using is probably 30 to 40 mils of mercury under what we would normally
yeah,
prescribe. And I would kind of go, we're not going to get much of effect, but they're actually still getting an effect and they're going, wow, I can actually walk with no pain in my Achilles, or wow, I can actually lift my arm above my head. And that's using a low pressure that I would go, like what you said, going, yeah.
If it's anecdotal, is it anecdotal? Yeah, but it turns out it's not, If it has an effect.
Yeah, and that's a great, like the deload, love it. Have you got a couple of other neat examples that you could share with us?
Yeah, so we had, so when I went to Guam, I took those straps over. We had a 3-team tournament playing Taiwan, Mongolia, and I can't remember the other one. Some other team, I can't remember, some Asian team. There's so many. But I remember going in, we had 2 of our best players traveling from the west coast of the States at the time, and the east coast of the States at the time, and they were my biggest high risk, and they were probably our better players. So these guys were wound up so tight, they were actually too lean. I couldn't get them any fatter. They were like 27 mils after 12 sites, like ridiculous, just naturally. But they were such a high risk of soft tissue. They'd had soft tissue before and all these sorts of things. So I would, when we did our strength sessions and that, I just pied them straight away and made them just do all cuff work. So they were doing, and listen, was it the right thing? But they'd just come off the plane as well, doing 29 hours of travel, 3 different time zones. There's no way, and not that the sets that I was doing and session that I did at the gym was very hard, doing box squats, and I was doing 4 press, again, partials, not looking to get soreness. I was looking to get a bit of strength, bit of power, 3 sets of 3, nothing crazy, something just to touch the boys on so we didn't detrain before we went. So anything we did before we got there, at least we've kept it in. But with these boys, because we actually had 3 brothers and 2 of them were twins, and they're all just genetically like wound up like balls. So I just said, no, I can't, these guys, wrap them up. And I did, I did a similar sort of session I do back in Hammer, reduced the rep ranges a bit. And then I did the hemis because that was a big one. I actually did their calves as well. And then we did, we'd end up doing 4 bench press, and then and I did do lunges with them. And to be fair, we got through that week. Now, listen, was it because of the cuffs? It was, who knows? But those boys played 70, if I remember, because he was substituted for his brother. So one was 70 minutes and the other one played 90. And usually we pull them off after 60 because they used to cramp. And then once they start to cramp, they can't, they're just rigor mortis, And then Nate, the younger one, ended up becoming our 90-minute player. He ended up staying on and becoming quite the good one. The other 2, who, caused that 29, 30-year-old barrier, starting to, we started to replace them as more often anyway. But Nate became and he uses that now all the time. He uses a Friday session. He uses, he wraps, I don't know what he uses, but he said he uses it. Hopefully he's not taking like a belt or something into the gym, but he said he was, I didn't ask him what he was using, but he said ever since that time, he had such a good positive outlook that he played 90 minutes. He kept going. So that was a really good positive story that I've used it for. I've also used it as an injury thing. So when we were at the Raw, we had guys coming back just from, I remember ex-soccer at the time, very, very timid when it comes to lifting. He did a bit of lifting, but he was not really, he had some degeneration of the knee, very, very high profile player. I convinced him to wrap him. Took some time, but we did. And he went gangbusters. He then, from then, after doing 2 or 3 weeks of just doing some cuff work where we deloaded him, like for him, it was really light, but it was so hard. He then started and jumped in with the boys, and I got by him through using the cuff because he wasn't like, oh, okay, I feel a bit better about it. I can lift without pain. I'm not going to break. It's not the weights that are going to break me because it was like an entry level, but the entry level, we would have got some really good gains because he was pretty weak. Put some BFR in, didn't have to overload him. It was a really different way of using it. It was the way I got buy-in from him. He became then a regular lifter in the gym with the other boys. But before that, he'd never touch it. But because I said, how about we go really light and I do this to you? Nothing else changes. You won't be, you're not any risk. And that's what convinced him. And then from then on, and he was squatting without pain. He's always had, and then he ended up playing, 11 to 12 games. Then we left. And then I think, I don't know what happened after that, but I think his knee went a bit bad. I think they stopped training and whatever. But as a KPI, that's a massive win for me. I thought that was one of my huge highlights, is actually getting some of these older guys in that squad to play, and to get them as fit as strong as they could be on there. And I was pretty chuffed with that. So that was probably one of my biggest success stories, because he was a high profile athlete. But in Guam, it was really good. Well, we were in Mongolia when we used it. I just thought, bugger it, I'm going to use it for these three brothers, and we had a really good pot. Now, could I say the one in Mongolia was anything to do with the BFR? Maybe not. Yeah, hopefully. But it still made them fresh, and they still lifted, which means they didn't detrain from their weights that they'd been doing beforehand, which was also my program. So because we were over there for 2 weeks, if we didn't lift, obviously we want to detrain. So it was one of those good things. And then, but when I came back, we used it for that injury, and as a bit of a comeback in, and that was a pretty successful way to use it. And the good thing was I'd done it with General Pop, you know what I mean? So heaps and heaps of times. So I felt quite, you think you're quite skilled at it, 7 out of 10, give me look your fingers. Yeah, no, everything's fine. You knew the things to reassure the player, because I've been reassuring the general public you're doing it, you know what I mean? So it didn't matter if you're a pro or not a pro. It's the same shit. So it was good. And they're my probably 3 highlights of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And just as you're talking there, we'll take your Guam one, for example. Like, I was just thinking about, that's even just a smart way of preparing athletes that they've come off a long haul flight. I think, you come into a national team or a big team scenario, and the temptation is, we've got to train. We've got to jam as much work as we can in there. How can you help mitigate risk? As a strength coach, we want to probably get our hands dirty and come on, let's get lifting in a group of athletes who don't like or traditionally lift.
Sorry to interrupt, but the other problem with that is I'm a coach who's more on the accelerator. Like, I like to push, and I don't mind. Listen, sometimes I make mistakes and they might get hurt, but I think it's a dying breed out there. From our perspective, is pushing performance. Too many people are so afraid of losing a job now because soft tissue and all that's such a big issue. And listen, don't get me wrong, it's still a priority in my head every day. You go out and train, but so many people put the brakes on too early before we even get to there. So when I did it with these boys, it was within that mindset that, well, I still have to get them in there, but how can I get them in there with the boys, but make them feel like, but at the same time protect them? But they're a special pop almost, you know what I mean? So they're a special population amongst a group of athletes, which is even rarer. That you're going to have your injured, your older guys, your younger guys, the guys who can do everything. And it was just one of those things. I think too many people, and maybe I'm getting sidetracked, but too many people put the brakes on way too early in the safety of their jobs instead of trying to get the best out of their athletes. So risk versus reward and all that. I think but there's so many tools out there where you can still put the accelerator on, you know what I mean, and get velocity loss stuff. Now we've got wireless accelerometers, you've got BFR, all these sorts of things are out there where you can push the pedal and still maintain an element of safety. But I think too many people just put that handbrake on too early.
Don't sell yourself short here. It's experience of you as a coach. You've seen, especially with your business, you've seen a wide variety of athletes from, we call all your clients athletes, whether it's from those who have never trained to the young, to the old, to those who love training, to the don't train. And so, even like yourself, when I first started, I did personal training. I still to this day. So that was an invaluable experience for me as a strength coach, because I could just continually learn on different populations all in one area.
Absolutely invaluable.
I was just kind of actually thinking about, you're saying that the players, your 3 players played quite well. One of the benefits of BFR is around ischemic preconditioning. So, and one of those offshoots from that is it improves the mitochondrial carrying capacity of the blood.
Mm.
So consequently, although they might be getting a little bit of strength, might be good for their joints and hips and their muscles because they've been sitting down for so long, and they're still getting really good muscle activation. They're getting hormonal activation.
Yep.
Are you getting some sort of fitness improvement as well, potentially,
Yeah.
through those kind of pathways?
I remember reading a study. Was it that study where listen, again, this was going back 2012, 2011 when I read it, so I could be wrong. It was a long time ago, but one of the things that grabbed me, it might have been at an ASCA conference, actually. I remember reading the guys who were walking on treadmills who had a strength gain and an aerobic gain. Was it for 4 weeks or 5 weeks of walking on an incline, 10% or something? They did nothing, and they had an increase. So that's the sort of stuff that made me go, fuck, maybe we can do that. That's the study that stuck in my head to implement it, and then let alone now. That's always the study. Like, remember we were talking before we went on, something that I told you that you've taken away from what I said on Instagram once. That's something that stays in my head every time I thought about BFR was like, look, they did so little and they had such a gain. So, even if we're getting, haven't got all the bells and whistles, we're going to get some adaptation. It seemed to be all those results, the anabolic hormone response, all that stuff seems to be such a very big reward for such a low effort level. You know what I mean? So that's where I got it from.
It's being smart.
Yeah.
So, and your point about your soccer player back in Australia, football player, apologies for the fanatics out there, is that I've actually sometimes thought with the right population, is this a better way to start lifting with someone? So traditionally, when you get someone in the gym, and people will talk about, they come into the gym and they think they've got to lift heavy weight. So under the wrong coach or under the wrong mindset, it's like, well, I've got to, and we'll take squat as your perfect example. Well, I've got to be squatting big weights because that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to get strong. I want to get the changes. And if you've never lifted before, as you and I both know, it takes a long time to actually see good noticeable change. So you got people pushing themselves probably with potentially poor movement patterns as a result of
low gym age. Yep, low gym age, and then they go and then they're expecting 10% increases every time, like it can take 6 months for a 2% increase sometimes, like it can just be, you're right. Absolutely. Maybe it is a way we could introduce it. Yeah.
I think I've blogged this a couple of times and thrown it out on these podcasts, is that you get someone in for the first time, you can actually slow it down. You can take them time to teach technique. You get them into positions, because if they have issues with joints, you get rid of the joint pain, and then you can go nice and light. They feel like they're getting some sort of muscular benefit, because as you said earlier, they just go, oh, my legs are feeling massive. They're screaming. So they're getting that physiological, but also that mindset that, oh, it's a hard session. And then they can actually see the change. So within a couple of weeks, you're looking down and you're going, actually, my legs are starting to, get a bit more definition, or, change shape to the way I want it to. And then over time, because training's all about stress, and whether it's metabolic stress through BFR or whether it's mechanical stress through using load, you're going to have to continually stress the system. So it might be over time, the cuffs come off, because load is still king. And I will say this over and over again, in an athletic population, load is king. We still need it. But then you then say, well, how can I use it continually? Use it in warm-ups, use it as primers, use them as finishers, use them as deload. And that's exactly right. Like, be intelligent. And that's the cool thing, and then you get buy-in as well from people that potentially might go, I have traditionally hated the gym, but now I can get a pain-free session done. I can feel a change in less time. I can do something in 30 minutes.
Exactly. And you know what, all that time early on, while they're learning the pattern, not only are they getting a little bit of metabolic stress, but, at such a low weight, they're still getting strength adaptations, you know what I mean? So they're based. I've always been a big believer. You've got to have a base before you can start throwing anything on there. You've got to earn the right to, it's, and that almost fast forwards it. You can be quite basic, and because and especially, and the other thing that you find, what I found with specific soccer player or footy player, his gym age was awful. He would have been less than some of my mum's or dads who've come in from they've been lifting for 10 years, they would be more experienced in the gym, right? So as you know, anyone with such a low base, anything we did, he had a huge effect. Like he just had this like curve that went up. So, his strength went up, his lean muscle mass went down, his pain was went really well. And then that also fed into his confidence. But because his base was low, so if you are starting anyone, I think about this now, spitballing with you, if I had a bunch of new athletes, new people come into a gym who never lifted before, who were a bit hesitant, and they were in a class atmosphere, and like, okay, why don't we do this? You do the same exercises, but we'll do it really light, right? And just look for these things. You might, after 2 weeks, put some cuffs on and do it, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, they're doing the bar. You can still just off them off, add load, exactly like you said, load is king. But then it doesn't mean that's the end of BFR. They're still going to have an affinity with it, use it in warm-ups, users deload. But then people who else you see it could be your protocol then for newies. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with it having as just think of that now. I never thought of it in a commercial aspect, but if you've got them, use them at the start for people who've never lifted before. Wall sits, things like that, things where you can just build up a base so then they can move into squats. So some people can't fucking squat, so you can't even do air squats awfully or through ankle mobility or whatever. So wrap them up, make them feel like they're doing something. Start off with wall sits and then move in. And then while you're teaching them, keep them on. So like you said, it'll be actually a really, really good idea to use it as an intro as for some clients. Granted, it might be a bit daunting, but maybe not.
But I think if you introduce it gently into it, I feel you'd probably get more noticeable gains, more from that aesthetic viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then also you think about, like, say, people who don't exercise a lot, they're sitting down a lot, they're not stretching like they should do. They're not doing all those little bits and pieces.
Who does?
Yeah. And what a lot of people find is when they use it, is like they have less pain. Like if they've had back pain or knee pain, they go, oh, it's gone. So then they have a positive association with exercise, that it's not painful, it's not stressful. They don't have to be trying to squat the house down, and they don't have to worry about their back or hurting themselves. And then if they want to go down that route of, hey, I'm really enjoying it, I want to go the German volume training, I want to go 5x5, I want to get my 1RM going, you can. But if they want to go that other route and sort of saying, I actually quite like this,
like what I'm doing, and you can change it by just changing the stimulus. Just put the BFR on, but just change the exercise. Go from goblet squats to lunges or Bulgarians. You just change the exercise, you get the same. There's your stress, So it's I never thought of it. I never, like, just speaking that out loud, I never really thought of it as an intro, but it makes sense. It's actually probably a good commercial way of doing it. Yeah.
I don't have a commercial group of clients.
I'm writing this down. Right. Protocol 1, new client. So.
Well, look, thanks for your time. This time's flown for me. It's been a great chat, and I do really enjoy our convos whenever we do get to catch up. You're doing a lot. You're very busy. Hammer Athletic. Let's just throw out some of your contacts and your socials, and I'll put this on my show notes as well.
Yeah. So we're at East Brisbane and 3 Manila Street. So if you're looking at someone, a good bunch of staff who know what they're talking about, we've got 2 boys there who've just finished. One's finished their masters, one's almost finished their masters, and one GPS and one in hamstring strains and groin stuff. Obviously, I'm the owner who has also done his masters. So we've got some really good, well-rounded coaches there. We've got 2 young boys who are really excellent. One's got his bachelor, one's almost finished his physio. And just a really great team, great bunch of lads. And if you want a gym that has forward thought, for you to be, like I said, my ethos is consistency. If you want to lose weight or get fit or strong, you've got to be in the gym more often. The only way to do that is with people who know what they're doing on Friday as well as Monday, next week, the week after. If you don't have that periodization of that forethought, then you're going to be broken down. Therefore, you're not going to be in the gym. And our boys do that better than most. So, Joe, we're down at East Brisbane. Search us up, hammerathletic.com.au if you want anything else. But other than that, I don't really like plugging yourself. I've just really enjoyed the talk, mate. But thank you for the heads up and everything. It was really good. Yeah, good to chat to you, mate.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you, listeners, for joining in this podcast. And, I try to keep these ones short and snappy, but what I feel for this podcast I've taken out is that, firstly, the BFR stuff is what I love about it is the simplicity of it and how you've taken something complex and made it simple. but also for aspiring business owners or coaches out there that, I think the first part was just some invaluable lessons as a coach on their journey into the S&C world. And, there's lots of lessons that we all make mistakes and we all learn from our mistakes. And, as long as it makes us better as a practitioner, I think that's pretty important. As long as it's safe mistakes, of course. We don't want to be saying
no negligence. negligence.
Yeah, exactly right. So be careful of that. But thanks again for your time, and thank you, listeners.
And that's all today for this episode of BFR Radio. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to take part in the podcast, please contact me through my website or on social media channels at Chris Gavilio. For more information and to order a set of your own BFR cuffs, please visit my website at sportsrehab.com.au. Thanks for listening and keep the pump.